Lone Star Community Radio presents the Lone Star Radio Hour. For the next hour, you will hear locally produced radio plays from different groups around Montgomery County. If you're interested in the Lone Star Radio Hour and you want us to run one of your programs that you produced, just contact us at lscrstudios at gmail.com. If you are interested in recording your own show here at the studio, you can just contact us. And we're also looking for sponsorships for this time slot. So, again, just contact us at lscrstudios at gmail.com. You can also visit the Lone Star Radio Hour online at irlonestar.com/LSRH. That's irlonestar.com/LSRH. For all the plays on on-demand format. The following radio play is produced by the Lone Star Radio Troupe. For more information on the Lone Star Radio Troupe, visit them on Facebook at facebook.com/Lone Star Radio Troupe.
We're recording. Go ahead. Do whatever you need to do. So you start the music, or
He'll come in first. And then
Maybe turn that knob on this side.
Good evening, and welcome to the Lone Star Community Radio's presentation of the Lone Star Radio Troupe. I'm Gordon Lockhart. I'll be your host this evening. Thank you for joining us as we present this evening's radio programs recorded in Lone Star Studios, located in downtown Conroe. We start this evening with an episode of Easy Aces. Real-life married couple Goodman and John Ace starred in this serial comedy that began when Goodman found himself in a radio booth with a no-show guest and 15 minutes to fill. Luckily, Jane was there and stepped in to help out. Their conversation, full of witty wordplay and Jane's now famous malapropisms, enchanted the listening audience, and soon enough they found themselves with a steady gig doing Easy Aces over the air for the next 15 years, from 1930 to 45. Here is Easy Aces.
Ladies and gentlemen, Easy Aces. Since the subject of this week is astrology, we have a couple of guest stars, Venus and Mars, love and war, you know, the stuff that's all fair in. And when Jane started wrecking our home because I was born under the wrong sign of the zodiac, our guest stars must have had a good laugh. This all began one day last week when my boss, Mr. Norris, came into my office with some good news. When Mr. Norris had something to get off his chest, he talks like a stuffed shirt, uses proverbs. This day, the good news was about a raise in my salary.
Give credit where credit is due, I always say.
Well, thank you, Mr. Norris. I've waited a long time.
Patience is a virtue, I always say.
Well, I've been patient, and now I'm rewarded.
Virtue is its own reward, I always say.
Well, I've been virtually without a raise for some time. Is this official, Mr. Norris?
It will be as soon as I sign this order to our cashier.
I have a pen right here, Mr. Norris.
Hello,
Please.
dear.
Well, Jane, what brings you downtown this early?
Just fine. Hello, Mr. Norris. How are you?
I've been a little under the weather lately, Mrs. Ace.
Yes, isn't it?
Jane, Mr. Norris has just told me I'm going to get a raise in my salary.
Oh, really, Mr. Norris?
Yes, just as soon as I sign this memorandum, it'll become official.
The pen, Mr. Norris. Here it is.
Oh, yes. Now I'll just sign right...
Jonathan!
Oh, hello, my dear.
Your secretary told me I'd find you here. I must speak to you immediately.
Come in, my dear. You know Mr. Ace, of course.
Good morning.
Hello, Mrs. Norris.
And what... excuse me, Mrs. Ace. This is my wife.
How do you do, my dear?
Hello, Mrs. Norris.
I'll be finished in a minute, Margaret.
Jonathan, no! That's why I came down here. You are not to sign anything today.
Oh, no, Margaret, not again.
The moon is in Capricorn. You are not to sign anything for the next 2 weeks.
No, Margaret.
The moon is in Capricorn.
Moon in Capricorn?
I am a firm believer in astrology, Mr. Ace. Everything Jonathan has, he owes to my astrological guidance.
But my raise.
Margaret, just this one
No,
little...
Jonathan.
Just my initials.
Jonathan, will I have to hide your fountain pen again?
Oh, Margaret.
But my raise.
I don't get it, Mrs. Norris. What happened to the moon?
The moon is in Capricorn, my dear. A most unfavorable time for Jonathan to sign anything. He's a Gemini. I'm a Leo. What are you, my dear?
I'm a little mixed up.
But my raise.
Mrs. Ace, don't tell me you don't know about the influence of the stars on our life.
All right.
My raise?
My dear, you should go at once to see Mr. Bush. He's my astrologer. I never make a move without him. He's simply wonderful. 22 years ago, he advised me to marry Jonathan.
No, bourgeois.
Jonathan, I won't have you casting disparaging marks at Mr. Bush. You know he's responsible for your success in advertising business. And wasn't it he who pointed out that since you were born in May, you're a Gemini? And I was born in August, so I'm a Leo. And May and August are most compatible months.
What am I, Mrs. Norris? I was born October 12th.
My dear, you're a Libra.
I am? And who should I marry?
Mr. Bush can tell you that, my dear.
Dear, what are you?
I'm the goat. Now look, Jane, we're getting along fine. Don't go looking for trouble. Aren't we happy?
Yes, that's right. Oh, no, Mrs. Norris. I wouldn't pay any attention to that stuff. That's the silliest thing I ever heard. What's that man's name again?
Mr. Bush. He's so brilliant, dear, and so handsome.
Mr. Bush. He's really silly if he believes you can only marry somebody because they happen to be born in contemptible months. Where's his office?
The Empire Building.
The Empire Building. Honestly, Mrs. Norris, I don't see how you can believe anything like that. Does he charge much?
Only $5 for your chart.
$5, Mrs. Norris. Honestly, I don't like to cast asparagus at the whole thing, but it sounds so silly. Do you have to make an appointment?
No, just walk right in anytime.
Well, so long, dear. See you later.
Oh, wait a minute. Where are you going?
I've got to go find out why I was born.
So Jane went to see an astrologer.
Have a chair, madame.
Thank you. Mrs. Norris told me all about you, Mr. Bush.
Oh, yes, Mrs. Norris.
She told me how you helped her and Mr. Norris. Can you help me that way?
Are you interested in the signs of the zodiac?
Oh, no. I just want to find out about my astrology.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. The signs of the zodiac. We're all born under certain signs. Do you know which sign you were born under?
Oh, yes, I think I do remember. Good to the last drop.
What's that?
I remember there was a big sign over the house. It said, good to the last drop.
Good to the last...
It kept going off and on. I think it was one of those nylon signs, you know.
Mrs. Ace, I'm afraid you don't understand. You see, the signs I speak of are the signs of the zodiac. They have their influence on our lives, and if you will give me some data, I will prepare a chart for you. First, how old are you, Mrs. Ace?
Over 21.
Over 21? No, that won't do. I must have your exact age.
Oh, but Mr. Bush, there are certain things that are private, and this is it.
But, madame, if I am to give
I
you
just couldn't indulge my age, Mr. Bush.
Then how can I prepare a horoscope if I don't know the year and date of your birth?
Oh, the year and date of my birth. Why didn't you just say so? October 12th, 1915.
Thank you, madame.
You're welcome. This is a nice office, Mr. Bush. I like the indiscreet lighting.
Yes. October 12th makes you a Libra, my dear.
Yes, that's what Mrs. Norris said. Now, what should my husband be if I'm a Libra?
Well, there are certain people with whom you can be more harmonious, and they are the people born under Sagittarius, Aquarius, Gemini, and Leo.
I used to know a fellow named Leo, but I never knew anybody named Sagittarius.
What is your husband's date of birth?
January 15th.
No, a Capricorn.
Bad, huh?
I wish you'd have met me before you married your husband.
Oh, Mr. Bush, this is so sudden.
No, you don't understand. I mean, I might have worked out something for you. that could have protected such a union, and perhaps even now I can do as much for you. Tell me, do you remember the exact time of day you were born?
The exact time?
Yes, it's rather important if you know it.
Well, of course, I was a little young at the time. What with all the excitement and everything, and the doctor and all...
Didn't your mother ever tell you?
You mean about the birds and the bees?
Yes. No! I mean the time of day. Was it early morning, afternoon, late at night? Surely your mother must have remembered that.
Oh, yes. She was there at the time, but I don't think she ever told me what...
Oh, well. I'll do the best I can with the facts you've given me. Of course, it is unfortunate that your husband is a Capricorn and you a Libra, but I think I can manage to conjure up a protection for you against the bad influence of the sign of the Capricorn.
But how can you do that, Mr. Bush? I'm already married to him.
I will make certain recommendations. Then there are certain charm rings, charm bracelets, and lockets, which I sell, which you should have. Now, suppose you let me make up your chart and you come back later in the day for my recommendations. Will you do that?
Oh, sure. Anything that will make my husband and me happy again. Are you sure it'll work?
No, of course. As a matter of fact, I have just finished an exact duplicate of your case, Mrs. Ace. Only it was the husband who came to see me. He's a Capricorn, and he was going to marry a beautiful young lady from Havana who was born in October as you were.
Ooh, a Cuban Libra.
Exactly. They are very happy now. Have no fear, Mrs. Ace. The stars will light the way.
Oh, that's pretty. Has this astrology been going on long? I never paid much attention.
The stars have had their influence over lovers since time itself. Lovers down through the ages have been guided by the stars. Take Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, but Romeo and Juliet didn't turn out so good. Didn't she take an overdose of sleeping tablets or something?
Of course. And you know why?
Oh, sure. I forgot. Romeo was a Montague and Juliet was a Capricorn.
While Jane was at the office with Mr. Bush, setting astrology back 1 million light years, I was in my office wondering when Miss Norris would let the moon out of Capricorn. I couldn't get my raise without Norris's signature, and his wife had said she wouldn't sign anything for the next 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, he might change his mind. I was sitting there thinking it was a pretty shabby trick of the moon to be in Capricorn at an important time like this. When who should come in but Gemini himself?
Mr. Ace, I'm terribly sorry about this.
Well, Mr. Norris, it's rather a shock to almost get a raise and then...
I know, but it's Margaret. This has been going on for years. Don't sign this today. Don't make friends tomorrow. Beware of business relations this week. It's all too much for me, and too much is enough, I always say.
Well, how about me? I was just about to get a raise and
No, your raise will be taken care of in time. I'll sign it when Margaret gives me the go-ahead. But I'm worried about you, Mr. Ace. Don't let this happen to you.
To me?
I heard Mrs. Ace say she was going to see this Mr. Bush. Mr. Ace, take a tip from me. Stop her. Don't let her get mixed up with astrology. A hint to the wise is sufficient, I always say.
But nothing's gonna happen. I mean, suppose she does go to see the man.
Please don't treat it so lightly, Mr. Ace. I've suffered this astrology thing for 22 years. It started with her first visit to Mr. Bush, and now Mr. Bush runs my life. I can't open a letter. I can't answer a letter. I can't take a business trip. I can't make a phone call unless Mr. Bush sees it in the stars.
Great heavens.
I warn you, Mr. Ace, if your wife starts talking astrology to you, nip it in the bud. Stop her before it's too late.
Well, thanks for the advice, Mr. Norris, but really...
This advice I am giving you, Mr. Ace, is the advice someone should have given me 22 years ago. I should have walked out of the house the first day she mentioned that man's name. And, Mr. Ace, I advise you to do the same now.
Walk out on my... Well, let's don't turn this into drama.
The play's the thing, I always say, Mr. Ace. You must take drastic action. A stitch in time saves 9, I always say. Promise me, Mr. Ace, for your own good, if she starts quoting Mr. Bush to you, you will pack up and leave. That'll bring her to her senses.
Okay, If it'll make you happy, I promise. But I know my wife better than you do, and I'm sure you're getting upset over nothing.
Mighty oaks from little acorns grow, I always say, Mr. Ace.
That's your privilege.
It'll all begin very innocently, Mr. Ace. You won't realize what's happening to you until it's too late. Little drops of water, little grains of sand, make a mighty ocean and a lot of land, I always say.
You said a mouthful.
Mr. Ace, if you had lived all these years in practically an observatory on top of Mount Wilson, if day after day you had to listen to "The sun is in Taurus, the sign of the bull, so Jonathan, be cautious in money matters. But tomorrow the moon moves into Taurus, the sign of the bull. So Jonathan, if you have an invention you want to invent, now is the time to invent it." That's what I've had to listen to for 22 years.
Sounds like a lot of Taurus to me. With the signs of the zodiac still ringing in my ears, I got home late that afternoon, and there was no sign of Jane. But soon, she came bounding in. Is that you, Jane?
It's me, dear. I'm home.
And where have you been all afternoon?
Now, just a minute, Capricorn.
You've been down to see Mr. Bush.
A very good question, and I'll explain everything that happened.
I wish you would.
Well, to make a long story...
Don't make a long story. Just get to the point, and then we'll forget it.
Now, just a minute, dear. You're the one who wrecked our marriage.
Wrecked our marriage?
You're the one who was born on January 15th, not me.
Well, I'm sorry I picked that day,
And
Jane.
who do you think is to blame?
Me, I suppose?
You Capricorn.
No names, please.
It's a good thing I went to Mr. Bush. He told me we can't get along together.
Well, if we can't get along, I guess I'll just move out.
Oh, no, you don't have to move out. Mr. Bush protected me against you.
You sure need protection.
A very good question, and here's how we do it. See this ring and this bracelet I'm wearing? They're engraved. They say Libra. And here's another ring and bracelet that say Capricorn.
Where did you get all this junk?
Junk? Junk? I'll have you understand these charms cost 25 cents a piece. Now you're gonna wear this ring and this bracelet. Come on, let's put on the bracelet first. Come on, dear, make a wrist.
You mean to say that our marriage depends on $1 worth of junk jewelry?
$1.10. Tax, you know.
Our marriage license costs $2.
We saved 90 cents right there. Come on, dear, put it on.
Jane, this is the end. I'm gonna nip this thing in the bud. This house is not gonna be turned into a planetarium. I'm leaving.
Leaving? Where are you going?
Oh, I don't know. Home to father, I guess. So I followed through with Mr. Norris's advice and left home. It was the first free night I'd had in years. Had some chop suey, bought a candy apple on a stick, went to a newsreel theater, watched the electric signs on Times Squares, and went over and got a room at the YMCA, Young Men's Capricorn Association. When I got into the office the next morning, I thought sure there would be some word from Jane. Nothing. I called home and got no answer. I found out later she'd gone over to Miss Norris's home for further instructions.
What do I do now, Mrs. Norris?
You mean he's left you?
He walked out on me last night and didn't come home. There have been nights when he stayed out late, but not to come home at all. That's the latest he ever stayed out.
Well, my dear, that's what a Libra can expect from a Capricorn.
But, Mrs. Norris, he's been a Capricorn all these years. And a rather nice Capricorn, too. Maybe I made a mistake,
Nonsense, my dear. I have complete confidence in Mr. Bush. And don't you worry about your husband's leaving you. I'll phone Jonathan at the office right now, and he'll speak to that husband of yours and give him a piece of my mind.
Oh, I wish you would, Mrs. Norris. Would you?
Of course, my dear. Meanwhile, you're going to live here with us.
You have no idea what a lonesome feeling it is to look across the breakfast table in the morning and not see that newspaper staring me in the face, even if he is only a Capricorn.
I sat in my office, suffering silently. That's the way Mr. Norris found me when he came in.
Good morning, Mr. Ace.
Is it? It isn't to me. I did what you told me to last night. I left home. I spent an uncomfortable night at the YMCA. I lost a porcelain jacket off my tooth. I got up this morning with chop suey on my tie and went to the automat for breakfast. And if you think it's fun sitting at breakfast table reading a newspaper with nobody to interrupt you, you're mistaken. She may be a Libra, but she's not a bad Libra, as Libras go. I think I made a mistake starting all this fuss over nothing.
Nonsense! You did the right thing. Be firm. Rock of Gibraltar, assert yourself. Someday you'll thank me for this.
Hello?
This is Mrs. Norris. I want to speak to my husband.
Just a minute. It's Miss Norris.
No, what does she want now? Hello, Margaret.
Jonathan, I want you to speak to Mr. Ace and tell him he's got to go home to his wife.
But, Margaret, this
Jonathan, do you hear me?
But if Mr. Ace...
Jonathan, you heard what I said.
Be firm, Mr. Norris.
If you don't speak to him, I'll never speak to you again.
Assert yourself.
This is what I'm saying. Is it penetrating that thick skull of you?
Rock of Gibraltar.
Well, Jonathan, are you going to do as I tell you?
No, Margaret.
What?
I think Mr. Ace did the wise thing. I stand behind him, hook, line, and sinker.
Look, Sinker, don't get me into this.
Jonathan Norris, this is the end. I will send your things to your office. You are not to set foot in this house again. I'll protect this woman from her husband. She stays with me until both of you come to your senses.
Yes, Margaret.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Well, Mr. Ace, I asserted myself. I was firm. Rock of Gibraltar. What do I do now?
What do? You move into the YMCA with me. We'll go out on the town tonight. How are you on candy apples? Well, that night Mr. Norris and I had chop suey. He doesn't bowl, so we each bought a candy apple. By the time Mr. Norris had disengaged his upper plate from the candy apple, he was exhausted. So we went home. Home. What is a home without a woman's touch? A gin rummy game. Natch.
That's gin, Mr. Ace. How could you throw me the jack of clubs when I picked your 10 of clubs?
Oh, I didn't remember. I've been eating too many of these chocolates. I've got to cut it out. My waistline is getting to be abominable. Meanwhile, over at Mrs. Norris' home...
That's gin, my dear. How could you throw me the 5 of hearts when I picked your 6 of hearts?
Oh, I didn't remember. I was thinking maybe he might be eating too many of those chocolates. He's got to cut it out. His waistline's getting abdominal.
Oh, stop worrying about your husband. He'll be all right. I just hope Jonathan doesn't forget to take his vitamin pill.
If he goes home, I hope he knows there's some cold chicken in the refrigerator. He always likes a midnight snack.
I hope he doesn't give Jonathan any. I've got him on a very rigid diet.
Maybe you ought to call him up and tell him not to eat any.
I should say I won't, but if it'll ease your mind, I will.
Yes, call him up.
He needs more care than a child. Out of my sight for one night, and he's eating cold chicken and not taking his vitamin pills.
I should have hidden those chocolates so he couldn't find them.
Hello?
Mr. Ace, this is Mrs. Norris. May I speak to Mr. Norris?
What's the matter? Anything wrong? Is Jane all right?
She's perfectly all right. Do you wish to speak to her?
Yes, I'd like to.
Just a minute. Dear, your husband wishes to speak to you.
Oh, finally.
But wait a minute, my dear. I don't think you should.
But I miss him.
You've got to teach him a lesson. He's weakening. Be firm. Assert yourself. Rock of Gibraltar. Be a Libra.
But just let me say to him that...
Hello, Mr. Ace. Mrs. Ace refuses to speak to you. Let me talk to Mr. Norris.
Oh, is that so? Well, Mr. Norris refuses to speak to you, too.
He does. Oh, he does. Well, give him this message. He's not to eat any of that cold chicken in your refrigerator.
Okay, I'll tell him.
But I want to tell my husband about the chocolates.
Oh, yes. Mrs. Ace has a message for you.
Well, tell her to give it to Mr. Norris. I'll put him on.
Here you are, my dear. You can speak to Jonathan.
Hello?
Hello, Mr. Norris. How is he?
He's fine. What's the message you have for him?
Message? Oh, yes. Tell him not to eat too many of those chocolates.
Thank you. I'll tell him. Oh, Mrs. Ace, how is Margaret?
Oh, she's fair to meddling.
Still at it, huh?
Oh, I forgot about the vitamin pill.
Mrs. Norris has another message for you, Mr. Norris.
Just a minute. I'll put Mr. Ace on.
He's putting my husband on. Here, you talk to him, but I'll peek in the receiver with one ear.
Hello?
Mr. Ace, tell Jonathan he is not to forget his vitamin pill.
Very well. I'll tell him.
Hello, dear.
Wait a minute. Who's got the ball? Who's this message for?
It's me, dear. Are you all right?
Don't worry about me. How are you making out?
Me either.
You started this. It's the most ridiculous thing,
Just
really.
because I wanted to find out about astrology?
I don't mind astrology, if you want to go in for it. But not the way you did. I'm willing to meet you halfway.
You will, dear. All right. We're at 86th Street and you're at 76th. We'll meet you halfway, on the corner of 81st. I'll bring Mrs. Norris with me.
Okay, I'll bring a friend for her. And so it came to pass, on that balmy May evening, two couples met on the corner of 81st Street and 5th Avenue. I wish you could have been there to see this happy reunion.
I certainly will not speak to him unless he speaks to me first.
Well, you started this whole thing.
Are you all right, dear?
You and that phony Mr. Bush.
Don't you call him phony.
Did you miss me, dear?
And you gypped me out of a raise besides breaking up my home.
You broke up your own home when you left your wife.
You stay out of other people's affairs, Margaret.
You look tired, dear.
Jonathan
You've
Norris,
got to
I
stop.
You
will
and your
never
Capricorns and
forgive
Libras.
you.
Break it up. What's going on here? Pipe down.
Oh, hello, policeman.
What's going on here? You people got a permit to hold a meeting?
No, officer. We're not holding a meeting.
No, sir. We're just having a family dispute.
We're all married.
Married? Now, is that a nice way for married folks to act on a beautiful, balmy spring night like this? It's spring, folks. Look at that sky up there. Look at all those beautiful stars up there.
Don't start with those stars again.
Look at them up there. Venus and Mars.
Come on, Jane. Let's go home. Good night, Mr. Norris.
Good night.
Good night, Mrs. Norris.
Good night, my dear. Come along, Jonathan.
Yes, dear.
Good night, folks.
Good night,
Good
officer.
night.
Yes, there's nothing like those stars up there to make those people happy.
You've been listening to Easy Aces, presented by Lone Star Radio Troupe here on Lone Star Radio. The cast this evening was Goodman Ace, played by Josh Sandros, Jane Ace, played by Sunday Lee, Jonathan Norris, played by Silas Wilson, Margaret Norris, played by Kirsten Krause, Mr. Bush, played by Silas Wilson, and Police Officer, played by Bob Galley. This evening's director was Milo Michelle. The producer was Tina Lockhart, and the executive producer was Rick Sellers. We would like to thank Jason and Lee Ohm from Conroe Coffee and Sean Thompson from Creative Content Creations for making this broadcast possible. After a few words from the station, the Lone Star Radio Troupe will return with our second selection for the evening. We will return to Lone Star Radio Troupe in a moment, but first, are you looking for somewhere to get out and have a good time? Go to Conroe Coffee in downtown Conroe for a great cup of coffee and a tasty treat. Take time to shop in the English-style boutique. Stay for lunch, then enjoy dessert. Find Conroe Coffee on Facebook and keep up with the latest events that are hosted by Jason and Leo Owen. Go to Conroe Coffee to start your day off right or to relax, recharge, and enjoy after a long day.
Thanks for listening to Lone Star Radio Hour here on Lone Star Community Radio. Don't forget, the Lone Star Radio Hour airs every Sunday at 7 p.m. on irlonestar.com and Conroe's FM 104.5, 106.1. If you want to join and be part of the Lone Star Radio Hour with your own radio play, contact us today at lscrstudios@gmail.com. We are also looking for support for this time slot, so if you're interested in sponsoring this time slot, contact us again at lscrstudios@gmail.com. And don't forget, this radio play was produced by the Lone Star Radio Troupe. For more information on the Lone Star Radio Troupe, visit them online at facebook.com/Lone Star Radio Troupe.